Video. Hi everybody, welcome to today's Virtual Mentor Office Hours with Global Lawyers of Canada. Thanks for joining us. Today we are joined by GLCBC's very own Edward. Edward is a wills and estates practitioner. He is an internationally trained lawyer, and tonight he's going to be sharing his story and a little bit about what wills and estates law is in Canada and taking your questions. So get those questions in, put them in the chat box, and we'll open it up as we go through the evening. I know he's keen to answer all of your questions tonight. So Edward, over to you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Siobhan. I just want to start off by thanking everybody for joining in on this meeting. It means a lot to us, especially with GLC. We're not limited to just provincial here in BC. We're coming from everybody internationally. Just meeting some of you both already. The time zones are probably a lot different from where we are right now. So, the time element is very precious, and I just want to thank you all for joining in on this meeting. And I hope you take some value from it. You forge some new connections. And hopefully by the end of this, we can all connect, and we can maybe wills and estates is something that you had in mind in the past, and maybe something it might be in the present for you in the future.
Fantastic. Great introduction. So Edward, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to law in the first place? Canadian originally, and still are Canadian, but tell us about your journey.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a broad question, and it's a question that I could probably answer in about 30 minutes or something like that. But I mean, just in short of it, I was born and raised here in BC. I started my undergraduate career here at Simon Fraser University, had a degree in criminology. And during that time, legal studies was part of something that I wanted to pursue, but I didn't fully take on until later on during my studies. And when I decided to make that decision, naturally being Canadian born, we study for the LSAT, and we go through the process of taking the LSAT and then applying to Canadian schools. And we know how tough that is, and the process that's involved. So I started all of that, I believe it's in 2012. I actually had to revisit this, looking at my resume actually, and some of the information that I have jotted down. But I started this whole process in 2012, summertime, and 2013 was when I actually begun my undergraduate training at the University of Leicester. And that's where I started my I would say, the legal career there, right? And there's a whole, I'm jumping a whole bunch of timelines here, from the LSAT to making the decision to go overseas for law school. But, I'm sure all of you have some questions on why I did that, and I can touch upon that. But just in a general sense, that's what I did. I went overseas to the University of Leicester. It was a 2-year senior status program. Then after that, I made my return here to Allard School of Law. I did the common law program there, which was a 1-year program. It was an accelerated program, and that was where I would fulfill all of my Ncaa requirements. I was assessed about 7 challenge exams. I think that's probably the standard protocol when you do go overseas and you're Canadian and you want to return back here to practice. Generally, it's about 7. I can't list all those 7 foundational courses on top of my head, and they were essentially covered through the LLMCL program that I took at UBC, and that was in 2016. And then after I completed that program, I started my articles with a boutique wills and estates law firm here in downtown Vancouver. And that's where the origins of, I would say, my expertise and experiences in the wills and estates field lies, and was founded back in 2016 until today. So, if you look at the totality of it, starting from 2013, from when I first went overseas, and to I started practicing. I actually got called to the bar in 2018. You know, it's a good 5 years, right? So it takes some time. It takes diligence and it takes persistency. So long story short, you know, you guys can pick that apart, you can digest it, and you can ask me questions in between. You know, I'm happy to talk about whichever stage that I was in and maybe that you're in currently, that, you know, maybe I can shed some light in and give you some pointers on.
I actually have a question. Like, so you said 5 years, but like from the beginning to the end of your studies, or from the moment you came back to Canada?
Yeah, so I mean, I started in 2013, right? That was when I went over to the University of Leicester. So that was a 2-year program. And then I came back here to fulfill my, I would say, the NCAA requirements to the UBC LLM program. So that's another year, right? And then I did my articles, and then we did the PL in BC. You had to do the PLT exam, the program, and then all of that. And then, you know, I got called in 2018.
Okay.
So there's no, I mean, there's a timeline there, but to specifically pinpoint the exact dates, I can't really tell you with certainty. But you know, we go by years here, right? In terms of when you're called and, you know, how many years you've been practicing. But yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's fairly standard, right? 5 years. I mean, if you compare it to if you were to do a Canadian law degree, I mean, you'd be looking at a 3-year JD, and then you'd be looking at articling for a year. And assuming you can find an articling position immediately on graduation from your JD program, you know, you're looking at 4 years there. So it's very comparable on that one for sure. And if you were to go and do an LLB as your undergraduate, for example, in the UK, then you can actually shorten it, the whole process, because you don't have to do a separate undergraduate like you do here in Canada. So you don't have to do the 4-year undergrad, you just do a 3-year LLB or a 2-year LLB. In fact, you do the accelerated program and that's it. So it can be quicker in some ways on that one. But Edward, why did you choose to do the LLM program rather than just self-studying for the NCAA exams? Because that's a question we often get asked.
Yeah, for sure. And to answer that question, it was a decision that, you know, I believe I made in the very beginning, actually, before I actually went to the University of Leicester. So, you know, much of this was, I did much of the groundwork before I actually went overseas, because my whole intention was to return here to practice here in Canada, right? And in order to do that, I was looking at avenues of, you know, okay, what would provide me with the best experience and education, and how to best do that. So part of that was the availability at that time of the UBC LLM program. And that was in 2015 or 2016. So during that time, the UBC LLM program was, I wouldn't say fairly new, but you know, it was between 3 to 4 years in that program. So it was still a bit developing. It was a fairly new thing in terms of offering it to internationally trained lawyers and students there. But my gut feeling was that, okay, if I do go overseas, I was well aware of the NCAA requirements and the fact that you do have to take the NCAA exams, right? And you know, it's really based on a lot of factors. You know, first starting with the finances, right? The first thing that everybody considers is, okay, well, you know, what is the financial feasibility of doing these exams on my own, you know, and during certain sessions versus, you know, doing these courses or these equivalent courses in a school environment, right? In a university environment where you're with fellow colleagues, and it's obviously the program, the finances of it is substantially higher. But you know, you have to make the assessment, which, you know, I did at the time of the ability to network there, gain the resources, have access to essentially, all of the career services there at UBC. So that was something that appealed to me the most. And and actually deep down, my goal was actually to get that experience in a Canadian law school. So I actually wanted to get the best of both worlds, where I experienced the UK training there in that equivalent law school, and then coming back here to BC and getting I wouldn't say the same type of training. It's actually very different in terms of the schooling in the UK and here in Canada, and that's a whole thing that I can even touch upon, where it's a drastic change. It's something where you also have to adapt again if you're coming from a background where if you are international citizen, where you're used to a certain way of studying there, and you're coming back here to practice, and you're deciding to get into one of these LLM programs, there is also an adjustment there too. So that's also something to keep in mind. But to top it off, that was part of the whole reasoning behind why I decided to pursue the LLM process. I guess I valued the time element of it as well, where there was certainty, where I knew that if I did the UBC LLM program, I would be finished within a year's time. So within a year's time, as you mentioned, Siobhan, it's quite equivalent to getting your JD here and doing the articles, and in terms of the timeline being called, right? So that 1 year was, okay, I knew for certain that once that 1 year program at UBC was finished, then I could either start my articles or start PLTC if I did secure articles first. So that was my timeline and one of my preferences that I decided to forego. And this is not to say that a lot of my colleagues as well did do the Ncaas on their own, and they were quite successful at it. And this is where you make the decision of, okay, well, I could do maybe 2 or 3 exams in this session. And then during that time, you could find work at a law firm, or you would just hone in on your resume and just figure out what type of legal experience or volunteer experience you can get. So those are the type of choices that some of my colleagues have made, and it worked out. And so it's really based on your preference there, Siobhan.
Absolutely. That's what we always say. It's a very personal decision which way you go. There's no right or wrong choice. It all comes down to what your circumstances are at the time. As you say, there is a monetary cost, consideration to take in to account whilst you're considering it. But then there's also the time, and can you really study for 5 exams and work full time?
Yeah.
Some people can. Some people are amazing like that. I physically couldn't. I did 1 at a time, so it took me a lot longer to complete my Ncaa requirements than a year, because I did 1 at each sitting, but I was working full time, as you say. So how did you go about finding your articling position? Because that's like a huge next hurdle for everybody.
That's what I would ask.
And yeah, that is the $1 million question here, right? It's how do you find articles? And there is a lot of answers and options to do that and to gain articles. I would just first touch upon my personal experience here. I started early on in the traditional route of when I did start my studies at UBC Aller School of Law. That was part of the reason why I want to utilize their resources and the career services there, where I could attend these networking events with small firms, medium-sized firms, and big firms, right? So I would say to start finding articles, it really starts with getting your feet wet there and meeting lawyers, right? That was the most daunting part of my first step, in trying to find articles, because you're in law school or you do your undergraduate, and even as an internationally trained individual, when you do come back here, and even if you are doing, let's just say, the Ncaa exams on your own, you're not getting exposure really to actual lawyers, right? You're not actually part of these events unless you actively go out there. So that's part of the reason why GLC right now it's a great organization, because you're getting exposure right now to lawyers themselves, right? During this time in 2016, GLC, I didn't know anything about GLC really, right? There was really a gap there where it was almost we're fending for ourselves there, right? And it's I'm trying to make connections with practicing lawyers here in BC, but naturally it's quite difficult, right? There you don't have that support system there, and that's available immediately, as opposed to other candidates. So, it's really for me during that time, it was a grind, right? The simplest way to say that, it was sending out those applications, always constantly revising your resume, and sending out emails and reaching out to firms. And, it was also having a lot of coffee dates with lawyers, right? And during that time, it's you don't see it while you're in the process, because you just feel it as, okay, well, I'm going to this meeting, and maybe it wasn't successful, or maybe it was, but you are essentially leveling up your experience. You're gaining the language of lawyers speak, which is you're getting comfortable with just being yourself, really. And during that time, how I found articles really, it was a big stretch. There was instances where I thought I secured articles, and instances where it didn't pan out. But just for long story short, the way I found my articles was, and it's funny that I say this, because sometimes the opportunity that you seek, it's actually right in front of you, right? It's the ones that are closest to you that maybe you overlook, and you don't take it seriously, because you feel that you have to go through the steps, right? And that's okay. Well, I need to submit my resume off to this firm. I need to go to the websites and the job postings and the job boards, which I did, which I did all of that. But at the end of the day, what happened was that I had a family friend, and his best friend was actually a lawyer, which I didn't even know at the time, right? But it's just that during your pursuit of articles, when you're trying to find articles, you try to let everybody know, right? You just get that word out. Hey, I'm looking for articles, because naturally people are going to ask you, oh, you finished law school, what's your next stage? And then, you want to be transparent, you want to be open during this time where it's okay. Well, I am looking for articles, I'm looking for. And the next question is, okay, do you have a specific area of law? And so, but I'll get into that. But how my articles came about was, it was simply talking to my family friend, and I just brought it up. I told him, I'm looking for articles. This is the process that I'm going through. And what I also find helpful is that you identify and you indicate what the steps you're taking are to look for articles, right? Because it's not something to just say, yeah, I'm looking for articles. Do you know anybody who's hiring? Right? Because if you ask me that question, it's hard for me to help you that way, right? And you want to try to reframe that question of saying, I am looking for articles. I've done X, I've done Y, I've done these meetings, I've looked into this. These are my areas of interest. Do you know somebody that can help me? Or do you know anybody else who is looking, right? So that was part of what I went through when I was talking to my family friend. I just went through the whole steps, right? It was very transparent, very open. And after that, he just mentioned, well, I have a family friend who is a practicing wills and estates lawyer. I think he might be looking, right? So that seed that was planted, that just started from there. And then I met with that lawyer. I had a couple meetings with him. And then that's when, and then this was not an advertised position here, right? And most of these arguing positions, the ones that are advertised, you know, you are going to apply for it, but how many others are going to apply for it too, right? There's going to be 10 or 20 or 30 or even 50. So you are essentially competing with a lot of individual and on a lot of candidates. And these aren't even internationally trained students either, right? They are students straight out from a Canadian law school, right? So you are, I wouldn't say you're at a disadvantage, but you're put in a situation where your chances of even getting an interview is quite slim, right? So that was part of my search of where, how I secured my articles. I met with that lawyer a couple of times. We hit it off. Everything worked out. Even though that arguing position didn't exist at the time, it was created for me. And that's, I would say, all she wrote in terms of how I started in this area of practice.
That's actually a really good point for Stephanie's question that flows
Mm,
perfectly from that break.
Yeah, well, so I was going to ask, because I think one of the biggest challenges, like you were saying, is that being an internationally trained lawyer, you are coming out of it still going against Canadian law school trained candidates. So my
yeah.
question was kind of, how is it that you would, and I understand now better what you're saying about your close circle networking, but how would you go about kind of, I guess, marketing yourself when you're going up against Canadian trained lawyers as well, to
Hmm.
like secure that article position? Like, do you have any tips for that as well? Because I find that it's really hard, like you said, when you're isolated and you don't have that big of a network. How do you put yourself out there more than you're kind of already trying to do, I guess?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, if you asked me this question probably a year ago, you know, I would give you a very personal answer, and I would tell you, you know, my ideas and my opinions. But, you know, I think the first, if to answer that question, it starts with even GLC today, right? Because GLC, it's gaining national recognition where we're providing you with the tools to be able to network effectively and efficiently here, right? And the whole goal, and you know, I don't want to mention it as a stigma, being internationally trained here, but you know, that's the reality of it. But you want to essentially, my whole thinking was that, you know, even though I did have an international degree, or you are internationally trained, wherever you decide to practice, if it's in BC, right? You just want to get the mindset that you're bringing value here, right? Even though if you're internationally trained, you have something unique that you know, maybe a Canadian trained law student doesn't have, right? And that is the outside experience and the ability to travel to, and you know, just in my case, right, just travel to a different country, not knowing anybody, and immersing yourself in that culture, and in that environment, that school environment, and just flourishing, right? Because you know, going to a different place, it's hard, right? It's difficult, and that trying to convey that when you do come back is a great step, right? What I also want to say is that, you know, it's not something to put yourself down on, where if you feel that, okay, well, you know, I'm already at disadvantage, I don't think, you know, if I'm pitting myself up against another candidate, you know, it's going to be tough for myself. Like, I would reframe that mindset and just say, you know what, I did go overseas, and I do have that experience, but you know, I know what I'm capable of, and I know what I can bring, right? And when you're communicating with potential employers, when you do go to events and you're communicating with lawyers, you know, you just want to convey that confidence, right? And you just want to say, okay, well, I went to this school, okay, and this is what I learned, this is what I gained from it, right? And you know, it's naturally, when you first start out, when I went to those type of meetings, you know, it was the elephant in the room almost, right? But you know, you want to address it, and you want to take it, you want to tackle it head on, because everybody knows about it, right? But it's really, you are the advocate of that particular law school that you went to. You are the advocate of yourself, right? And I think Siobhan brought this up in one of her posts. It's, you know, the end goal here is to become a lawyer, right? And you are going to find yourself facing so many challenges, even as an internationally trained lawyer, where you have to even go through law school. Law school was a challenge, right? Getting into law school was a challenge. Successfully completing law school, and then finding articles is a challenge. But that's not even part of it yet, right? Because once you secure articles, the next challenge is actually carrying out those articles successfully, right? It's actually providing value to the firm that took you on, where you are working your butt off to the point where you can get either a hire back, or you are establishing enough connections and usefulness that you could get a frame of reference from that article or that principal you articled with, to share word of mouth to other lawyers, right? So if you look at the bigger picture of it, I guess my advice would be that, it's not about I need to secure articles. How do I convey myself better than the next person? It's, I'm going to be a practicing lawyer here in BC, right? The goal is I'm going to become a lawyer here, and these are the steps that I need to take. And how can I go about doing that, right? And then that's where you take that goal and you break it down, right? It's okay, well, how do I maximize the resources that are available to me now, such as GLC, right? And it's not even GLC too. It's connecting with individuals through LinkedIn. And, I think LinkedIn has been great so far in terms of the light in the tunnel of this COVID-19 that's happening right now is that a lot of lawyers are open to connecting virtually, right, and meeting virtually, such as these type of meetings here, right, because it's quite painless. They are not meeting you for a coffee or physically going out there and meeting with you. But they're already seeing face to face, right? Such as you, Stephanie, like I can see where you're coming from, and you're not even here in BC, right? That's the positives about that, right? So you want to just maximize your opportunity, just take advantage of the time here that you have now, where, maybe a majority of lawyers right now are in front of the computers, right?
Absolutely, so many great tips there.
Awesome.
It really, hopefully that is helpful for all of you watching, and I'm sure it's something you've probably heard a few times. Like if you've joined any of our mentoring sessions, we sound a little bit like a broken record at times, but it is because all of us truly do believe in the same thing, that your experience, whatever your experience is so powerful and it's yours, but you've got to own that. And you've got to be able to demonstrate why that's an advantage for an employer. And as Edward just said, it's not just thinking about the next hurdle, it's thinking about the whole future goal, which is huge and scary. And, really I've got to think about like winning clients, but that's ultimately what you're doing, because you're showcasing why you're going to be a fantastic lawyer and advocate for that client in the end, and how your experience is going to help you do that. So if you reframe, as Edward says, reframe that way of thinking, and don't automatically see it as a hurdle, but see it actually as an opportunity, doors may open. And as Edward was saying, sometimes it's those doors that are so close to you that you don't even think about. It really can be like that. So if you do have some form of network, whatever kind of network it is, tap into it. And if you don't have one, build one, right? There's so many opportunities online. And you know what? Hey, we're in September. And you know what September means? The start of a new year. We still all believe in a new year in September. Everyone has that back to school mentality, and you're going to see it now. You're going to see that all of those organizations that kind of went quiet over the last sort of 6 months are ramping up, and there's going to be so many opportunities to meet virtually. And now is your opportunity to build those networks and take advantage of them. So sign up to newsletters from law firms that you're interested in, because they're going to have virtual events, and then you can talk to people and meet people that way. That's your introduction. Hey, I attended your seminar. I found it really interesting because, please can I book a 10-minute virtual coffee with you? Super easy for them. They're already sitting in front of their computer and want an excuse to not have to look at that document they've been drafting all morning, to talk to you and talk about themselves. Because what lawyer doesn't love talking about themselves? Let's be honest, right? On that one. So Edward, you found your articles, you were saying, because of a family friend. But what made you pick wills and estates over continuing to look for something else or in a different practice area? Was there a defining moment? Was there a thought process?
Yeah, that's I think that's a great question, because, you know, heading into this in the very beginning, I thought I was going to pursue criminal law here, right? And you know, part of the reason why I wanted to become a lawyer was to be a criminal lawyer, right? But you know, and that's part of the reach here in terms of what area of practice you want to get into too, right? It's thinking that you know, this is something that you want to do, but when you're actually in it, you know, maybe that's something not for you, right? And that was part of the process that I went through. And you know, that I even, when I first started my UBC LLM program, I applied for the Crown Counsel too. That's the BC Prosecution Service there, because I did have a background. I did a practicum, a summer practicum, through my undergraduate at an office at Port Coquitlam, which, you know, I loved. I spent time there with lawyers, and this was at a very early stage back in 2012, right? Before I even decided to practice law, I wanted to get that sense of, okay, what is it like being in the company of lawyers, right? Is this a lifestyle that is something that you're willing to pursue? Is it something you're willing to devote hours to? Right. And for me, that was part of the reason why, okay, I think this is for me. So that's where I started my journey of getting to criminal law. But when I started at UBC, actually, I found that maybe this is actually not for me, right? And that's part of the process of looking for articles too, because naturally the next question is, okay, well, you know, did you always focus on wills and estates, right? Was this something that you planned since day one, or did you try to just look for whatever that was there, right? Because when you're searching for articles, sometimes you can cast your fish net so wide that you're not catching anything, right? So you just want to make sure that it's aimed at what essentially your particular skills are, right? So when I found out, when I was nearing the completion of my legal studies, I found that what I tend to gravitate towards and what I found appealing was writing. But it was writing and dealing hands-on with families, right? And dealing with the personal problems here, because being a lawyer, there's different types of lawyers, right? Naturally, there's the solicitors, and there's what's called the barristers or the litigators, right? It's either you are a courtroom lawyer or you are a lawyer that's in the office drafting documents and whatnot, right? So, you know, early on, I found that, you know, I wasn't a litigation lawyer, right? I was more inclined to be behind the scenes, or not necessarily behind the scenes, but upfront with clients, right? Dealing directly with them rather than in front of a judge, right? And that's something that that I would just recommend, that when you are going through your studies or just determining what you want to do, it's, you know, what are you most comfortable with, right? If being a lawyer means being in court, and if that's something that you feel that is comfortable with you, then by all means pursue that, right? But for me, it was more so of, this is the opportunity that I had in front of me. I didn't have any early inclinations of wills and estates law. So to be honest here, I didn't have a deep understanding of, okay, well, this is actually what I wanted to do in the very, very beginning, right? And there was actually there's a personal family background in terms of wills and estates that had a personal bearing on me to drive me towards wills and estates. And I think that's part of the reason that pushed me towards this area of practice. And when I started this area of practice, I found that it didn't feel like work to me, right? And I think that's one of the most important elements where if you are practicing in a particular field or area of practice, if you start it and you devote hours to it because you're going to be working your butt off, you're going to be thrown into the trenches. And when you hit that, when you're pulling that all-nighter, like Siobhan that you mentioned, you want to feel that, okay, when you come out of that, okay, I just did an all-nighter, but it's okay because what I did, I found my work to be meaningful. It's an area of practice that I know that I can provide value in and I'm good at, right? Because at the end of the day, with law firms, it's assessing, it's constantly really assessing your expertise here and your skill set, right? And that's something that I also want to touch upon here, where when you are searching for articles, firms do focus on where your background was, right? But they also focus on what you can offer to them. Okay, so if you have a particular area of mind or a field there, such as even wills and estates law, then you are going to immerse yourself in that area, right? You're going to go to the meetings where that area of practice lawyers gather, they network there, or you're going to look into the specific subject areas there, right? So that's sorry if this is a long answer to your question, Siobhan, but that's essentially how I got to where I am right now.
I love that answer though. I love that it's long because it really isn't a simple question. It is a really difficult question. It's like trying to tell somebody when they're 16, what are they going to do at university? Like, how does a 16-year-old know what they want to do at university and what they want to do with the rest of their life? That's kind of the same thing as asking, a law student or a junior lawyer, what is it you want to do for the rest of your career? And I love the fact that you explored your own personal skills. And what drives you, and then you applied those to different types of law after having spoken to lawyers and gone to CBA section meetings and attended webinars and gone for those informational coffee date things that we do, the virtual coffee dates and things, because that's such a good way of figuring out if your skills and your purpose is going to fit that practice area, because the last thing you want to do is hate getting out of bed every morning. It sucks, people. It's not fun. And you're going to be in this career hopefully for a really long time. So if you can at least enjoy it 60% of the time, you are winning at life, right? Because you're not going to enjoy it 100% of the time, honestly. But yeah, as you say, like if you don't hate yourself because you had to pull an all-nighter last night like I did, which was self-inflicted, by the way, being a bit slack, it makes life far more enjoyable on that one. So tell us about wills and estates law, because it's an area that we don't cover in the Ncaa exams all that much, unless it's one of the optional modules that you get given. It's not necessarily an area of law that you cover at law school even, and it is very different, I believe, in different provinces, but it is covered on the PLTC course. So if you are going to qualify into BC, you do have to learn about wills and estates, because the PLTC course is mandatory. So this is kind of useful.
Yeah, and happy to touch upon it. It's a fairly broad question, but yeah, I think the thing about wills and estates is it is part of the PLTC practicum. It's something that they do test you on if you're trying to get called here in BC. And it's when I started PLTC, I had a little bit of I had obviously exposure already because I did my articles and then I did my PLTC. So I had exposure to the wills side. And, it's the easiest way to describe this area of law is, or whenever you tell somebody I practice in wills and estates law, and then they say, okay, well, what's that? It's the easiest way to say that is it deals with death, right? And it sounds morbid, but there are so many factors behind it that I find it fascinating. So with wills and estates, it's essentially split up into three main categories here, right? There's estate planning. So the estate planning side is where, and this might either sound intriguing to you all or boring, but the estate planning side essentially deals with planning for families, right? It's creating a will and understanding, what the assets and liabilities are for families, how they want to leave their legacy behind to their children. And that whole nature, it involves drafting, right? It involves problem solving, dealing with the complexity of families and trying to simplifying that, and trying to structure their legacy in such a way where when they're gone, everything is going to pass on to either their children or any charities or any organizations here, right? So that's the first side of it. The second side of it is the estate administration side, which deals with when your loved one is gone, right? And that's the whole process of behind submitting an application for probate. It's the whole side of acting as an executor, the duties, and just preparing for the funeral arrangements, selling assets, gathering assets, protecting assets, reaching out to creditors, beneficiaries. So all that jazz and all that good stuff when you pass away, right? And then estate litigation, which is more the litigious side, right? This is where maybe an estate planning, wasn't properly planned, and then a disgruntled family member decides that, hey, you know what, mom was supposed to leave me something behind, but they didn't. Now I'm going to challenge this will, and they're going to take it to court. It's very costly, time-consuming, just breeds more tension, creates dissensions among family, and that's the unfortunate reality of it, right? Needless to say, this area of practice, it's very fulfilling, and it's very satisfying in a sense that there's those three main components. There's a lot of opportunity I find when I started to try to hone my expertise on each separate field there, right? So when I started, since day one, it was, okay, well, what is estate planning, right? And it's just reviewing countless amounts of scenarios and dealing with files where it's, okay, well, and it's thinking on your feet of, okay, what's the best strategy here to advise a family? They have $1 million in assets. How can they leave that behind to their children in the most tax effective way to avoid probate or just maximizing those type of strategies, right? So I found that to be intellectually stimulating in a sense because it compiled all that I learned in terms of dealing with families and the face-to-face communication and just getting a sense of what families want to do. So that was for me something that I took away with that I want to further work on and hone. So, that was 2016, right? And now we're in 2020, right? And I'm pretty much almost 4 years in, and I still feel that I'm just getting my feet wet here, right? Where I just want to continue on to get better and continue to build my expertise here. And that's something that just applies to being a lawyer in general, right? Being a lawyer in general means that, every day you are learning new things, right? And Siobhan, you can probably attest to this, where and that's why I say you're going to think bigger picture in terms of the process of getting articles and becoming a lawyer, because once you become a lawyer, it doesn't end there, right? You're still continuing on. You're still having those long nights and early mornings where you're just trying to. It almost feels like you're in quicksand, right? And you're just trying to get out of it. But during that time, everything goes on, right? Life happens to you. You're a bit older. Family gets older, and you're dealing with all these dynamics. And that's the part of the reason of finding the practice area where you feel that you can kind of juggle all of this without losing your mind, almost, right? That's the easiest way I can say that. And for me, Wilson Estates Law, that's so far that is the answer. And whatever specific questions that you have in terms of if wills and estates is something that you do want to head into. I'm happy to, you can reach out to me personally. I've met with individuals who actually reached out to me and just asked me questions of, how I can get into this area of practice. And, I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to share some information of, even lawyers in my network, because you don't have to start from scratch here, right? You can lean on individuals such as myself, where it's going to put you at least maybe 1 foot in the door, right, rather than just knocking on it.
Absolutely. So Pearl has a question, which we're going to come to, Pearl. Don't worry. But I just wanted to follow on from that. So it sounds like wills and estates law can be quite emotional. You're dealing with individuals at some of the most traumatic and emotional points in their lives, either because they're planning for their future death or they're going through a situation where they've lost a loved one. How do you personally deal with that? How do you deal with those emotions from them, but also your own emotions?
Yeah, and great question again. And part of the reason why I think this area resonates with me, it's because the interpersonal element and communicating with empathy was something that I found to be one of my strong points, early on, right? It's meeting with families, and I'll tell you a story, actually. During my undergraduate, I did a practicum with the Canada Border Service Agency, right? And I was deporting illegal immigrants outside of the country here, okay? And naturally, to be honest, when I accepted that role, I didn't foresee the nature of it and the severity of it. It was more so of, okay, this is the role. They didn't really tell me what it involved. And when I started that, it was, okay, you're actually going to deliver this decision to them. You're going to meet with families and you're going to tell them that they have to leave the country in 2 weeks. Get a plane ticket for them and tell them to leave. I was thinking, well, what's going on here, right? I didn't really sign up for this. But then when I started training for this, and I started having these interviews and these meetings, my goal was, okay, if I'm going to deliver this message, I'm going to try to be empathetic. I'm going to try to help them as much as I can and understand where they're coming from, right? And dealing with a certain scenario of, okay, well, they do have to leave, but what are the options available to them? How can I best prepare them if they do want to leave, that they can come back here to Canada, right? So that was early on when I found that, okay, meeting with these families, it didn't scare me, right? It didn't make me lose sleep at night. If anything, it pushed me to say, okay, well, I'm going to try my best to try to help these families as much as I can here, right? I'm going to try to get a sense of what their personal problems or issues are, and I'm going to try to convey my message as part of an organization to them, where they would have the understanding that, okay, well, I've dealt with this specific individual, but I have the comfort level or the confidence that whatever that's being conveyed to me, that I understand that person, and I'm gonna listen to that individual, right? So that's where it kind of stemmed from, dealing with the whole Wilson estate side, right? Because this area of practice, as you mentioned, Siobhan, is quite contentious. You're dealing with families who have lost a loved one, and it's hard to focus, right? It's hard to process the information, because there's going to be the element where they don't have control, and when they are seeking control, it's most likely in front of you as the lawyer, where they say that, okay, well, what's next here? What do I do? My husband just passed away. I'm at loss for words. Can you guide me through the next steps, right? And that's where I found that that I could provide the most assistance to, and that I could assist them where I could get them to the point where, maybe they are still mourning, but they are thinking coherently, they're thinking logically, and I'm communicating them in such a way where they would understand that here are the next steps, and as a lawyer, I'm going to be with them every step of the way, from the very beginning to the middle and to the end, right? And that's part of the allure of being a lawyer here. It's you're dealing with issues of clients most of the time. Bang on, right? And sometimes you don't have enough preparation or to do your research in facing the scenarios where, okay, this is a client, this is a scenario, how can you deal with it, right? And the most important thing is that you have to have the strong foundations and the principles that you carry with yourself, because at the end of the day, you are providing the legal knowledge, but you're also learning the ways of communicating to them the best practices and how they're going to move forward, right? And that in the area of wills and estates, I think that's something that resonated with me the most, and how I'm just day by day, it's something that I want to continue on with.
No, that's great. Because that's always, for me, one of the biggest things is I'm not very empathetic when it comes to people who are crying, because I cry. So maybe I am empathetic because I literally cry more than they do, which then makes me a basket case and useless. So I'm not going to be very good in that situation. So I'm not going to do private client work where it's dealing with people's emotions. You know, that's about learning your skill set and applying it to the right areas on that one, for sure. But I'm glad there are people out there who can be empathetic and supportive of people when they're going through some of the most challenging situations they're ever going to face in their life. So it's good to know there are good people like you out there, Edward. Pearl, do you want to ask your question? This is going to go back to a comment that you made a little while earlier.
Yes. I just wanted to find out from Edward how he was able to ensure that he was retained by the law firm, because my law firm didn't give me an offer, and I was working my butt off. So I just wanted to know if you did anything in particular to ensure that the firm would retain you, to make yourself indispensable to the firm.
Yeah, and what area of practice were you in, Pearl?
Okay, so they did insurance defense, general litigation, insurance defense, municipal defense, construction law, real estate, things like that.
Yeah, and thanks for joining, Eric. So to answer your question, Pearl, what I would advise is that, you know, first things first, don't take it personal. You know, with law firms, you know, sometimes when they make those decisions, it's out of your hands at times, right? So you could work your butt off. You can produce the amount of deliverables. You can satisfy all the tasks that they've given you, and you can perform it to a T. You can be a superstar in that firm, and maybe they can't even retain you, right? So you know, there really is no direct answer here, but it's dependent on the firm that took you on. But you know what I can just say is that value what you've done so far, right? So if you're in insurance defense, you know the task that you've been assigned, and you want to just record it and document all of the duties and tasks that you've taken on, and you want to essentially celebrate your earmarks, right? The task that where, you know, maybe you received some praise for, where it was successful, or you've assisted in a certain case law, or in a courtroom case where it's either you produce research for that particular law. So you want to just document and just all of your responsibilities that you've done up to task, right? Because you have to view it in such a way where it's that everything that you've done up to today was not a waste of time, right? Every task that they've given you was a stepping stone to what you're going to be doing in the future, right? Because when you do reach out to other law firms, it's okay, well, you know, I did this at this law firm, and you know, I whatever that you've done in that particular firm, it might resonate with the new firm that you're interviewing for, or they are looking to hire you for, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're completing your articles, it becomes very tangible, right? The firms that are taking you on, they want to see, okay, well, what specific duties and tasks did you perform there, right? And that's where you are going to make sure that, and this is something that I did too, right? So going back to your question of, okay, how did I know, or how did I ensure that I was, because I was retained with my firm here, right? The firm that I articled with, they also decided to hire me back too, right? And it's something that sometimes you have a feeling that they're going to hire you back, but then there's a lot of my colleagues in the scenarios where they have no clue, right? And they only know until the very end, maybe within a month left of their articles, whether they're going to stay on or not, right? And it really depends on your relationship with your principal too, because sometimes principals are very honest and upfront. With my principal, I had the great pleasure of having a great mentor and a principal where everything was fairly transparent. I was notified very early on whether I was going to be retained or not, and it's really about providing enough value where they can see that okay, well, if I do keep Pearl on, you know, is it going to work out for this law firm, right? Is she going to bring in enough to justify paying her a certain amount, right? Because it comes down to the finances, right? And as I mentioned early on, sometimes that's something that you can't control. Even in this COVID environment, you know, maybe some firms might be struggling, or there's unforeseen circumstances there, right? But for you, it's okay, well, if you know for a fact that they're not taking you on, then you want to not burn that bridge, right? You want to ensure that whoever was your principal, they'll write you a good reference letter. You know, maybe you can just broach up the subject. Okay, well, do you know any of firms that might be hiring that you might view that might be a good fit, or that I might get along with, right? So you are essentially continue on that dialogue, right? Because they've given you that first opportunity of articling with them, right? So as I mentioned in the beginning, that's the first stage, right? The second stage is actually finding a firm to take you on after you're done articles. And that's part of the process where you're constantly working, you're constantly building the new connections, and you're continuing fostering the old ones that you've built, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic tips. And Tiago makes a really good comment as well, that recording the work that you've done. So this is something that you have to do in the UK, is that you actually have to keep a log of the work that you do during your training contract, during your articles, and you actually have to submit it to the Law Society at the end. And it's something that I naturally did, and it's come in really handy later on, even for just your natural review period. If you have a sort of just a tally of the types of things you've done, the types of tasks you've done, the types of clients you've worked with, it just makes it easier for the next stage in helping you sell yourself and your experience, and giving you the confidence when you go into an interview situation that you can do that task because you have done it. And sometimes it's about building up our own confidence as well, right? Jawad,
can I?
Question.
I don't have a question. I actually wanted to add something to what Edward said. Can I? Okay, just to answer, just to add to Edward's answer to Pearl, I think the size of the firm also matters, because the smaller the firm size, the greater the principals and the firm relies on you and everyone at the staff. So if you have a very big firm, then it will be easier for the firm to find somebody else to do the work. But if you can, let's say, you know, if you've actually worked your, you know, applied yourself, and if you've really worked hard, then, you know, a bigger firm will still be able to find somebody else who will be able to work equally as hard. But a smaller firm may not be able to, and thus they may be relying on you a lot more. So this will obviously increase your chances of securing articles or getting a confirmation later on. That's what I think.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good point. Yeah, it is also, yeah, as you say, it's about those relationships and finding the space that fits you, fits your style of work, because everybody develops a style, and that is what I think of as fit, right? It's developing your style, your personality, and then finding an environment where you can flourish in that, and not getting hired back. You know what? It's not the end of the world. This is just the next step. And you know what? It's probably the best thing that could happen to you. You'll look back on this in a few years' time and be like, yes, thank goodness I didn't get a call back, because look at all these opportunities that have come my way that I maybe wouldn't have seen had I stayed on that track.
Mm-hmm.
So stay positive. You've got this. Talk, Pearl, you can message us afterwards and we'll chat as well.
Yeah.
Jawad, did you want to ask your actual question?
Yes, so my question was that in wills and estates practice, how important is it for the lawyer to be familiar with religious laws, and how much do religious laws have a part to play in that practice?
Yeah, and to answer that question, when you mention religious laws, what type of laws are you referring to? Is it actual religious laws, or where's or is it indirect?
Or is it customs?
Yeah, or customs there.
No, I'm not talking about customs. I actually do not have any idea about wills and estates practice in Canada, but from what I have practiced back in Bangladesh, where I was from, a lot of the applicable laws was basically just applying the religious canonical laws, if I may say, call it that, canonical laws of the religious denomination that the deceased person was from. So let's say if a Muslim person had passed away, then there would be a certain way in which his assets would have devolved to his heirs and successors. And if a Christian person, or if any other person from any other denomination, Hindus and Buddhists, they have different ways in which their assets sort of devolve onto their heirs, and they have different ways in which heirs and successors are also sort of identified. So does that play a part at all here?
That's fascinating, actually, and the short answer is no, it doesn't. Here in BC, we're governed by WESA, so that's the Wills, Estates, and Succession Act. So there's no religious law or applicable customs that are being applied here. So in BC, it's very specific, and there's only one legislation there that applies, right? And what I thought originally your question was the whole religious aspect of it, because there's a lot of families that are fairly religious, and they have certain ways of distributing their assets and how they're going to pass on to their heirs and their children, right? Which is very understandable when I've dealt with these families, right? But the short answer is that everybody's going to be bound by the laws here in BC for wills and estates. Okay.
Yeah, it's very strict on PLTC. If you've never looked at it, you can go on to the Law Society of BC. You can actually download the PLTC material, and there's a whole section on wills and estates if you're interested in this. But in order to have a valid will, there are very, very strict criteria. And then I guess any sort of additional requirements you want to put on top of that, which may be stemming from a religious belief or a religious custom, would then have to comply with WESA, the law that is applicable here, because the law takes precedence over the religious aspect of it, the custom, which it would be here more than a law.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the wills variation cases breed, where some families are very religious and they follow their own customs, not knowing that they are bound by WESA here in BC, and unfortunately, those are the cases that litigation lawyers take on, and they fight for those families, right? So, but that is a good question there to consider, But as Siobhan mentioned, for PLTC, there is information in terms of early access if you want to review that in wills and estates, just to get a jump on it. It's always good to review all those materials in advance.
It's also good just for your own personal knowledge, because ultimately you're going to have an estate of some description, even if it's you have a loan that you never repaid because your student debt is still outstanding in 20 years time. you know, you still have an estate at this point. So it's useful to know what rules are applicable to you.
Don't get me started, Siobhan. I can go off on a tangent and talk all about why you need a will and so forth. But yeah,
I feel there's a market here that you could actually do like a clinic, and you could do, you could get everybody else to write their wills for everybody on this call, because lawyers are the worst. You know how people talk about doctors being the worst patients? Lawyers are the worst people for having their estates in order. And I'm sitting here at the moment crossing my fingers and toes because I am one of those people for sure who doesn't have it in place. And I feel if there's a few other people on this call as well who are like, so if there's a clinic, go sign up. They do have a clinic here in BC. I'm sure it's national, where they encourage everyone to get a will written. Tiago has another question, which is pretty good actually. It stems on from what Jawad was just saying.
Okay.
Tiago, do you want to ask it? Seeing if you can unmute.
Hi there. Yeah. So my question is basically if wills in the States, how wills in the States interact with Aboriginal law, especially here in BC, that we have a really strong sense of Aboriginal rights, and especially after the inclusion in the Constitution. How would wills in the States be affected by those fairly recent rights?
Yeah, and that's a good question too, Tiago. And this is the area of information that I haven't really dealt with exclusively here. So there's going to be some gaps in what I can convey, and I don't want to speak out of turn in terms of the dichotomy between WESA and Aboriginal law. But you know, my understanding is that there are some I would say rules in place that deals with Aboriginals in terms of will making, that the requirements are slightly adjusted and amended here to compensate for the fact of Aboriginal families. I'm sorry, Tiago, that I can't really expand too much on it, but I know there is a relationship there in terms of what the BC government has recognized for Aboriginals in terms of making a will and the administration process. So that's something that I would have to look into a bit further in order to fully answer your question. I'm sorry if that doesn't really help.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
I love these questions. This is why I love mentoring hours, because I learn things too. Conscious of the time, because it's getting very late for you guys on the East Coast, and also that Edward will be having a baby that will wake up and want feeding very soon, I'm sure.
Yes.
He's a very new dad. So he's joining us in between baby breaks. But does anybody have any more questions for Edward, with either about wills and estates, about his journey, about his mentoring?
I do.
Go for it.
Actually, you touched on something. So Edward, you're a dad. I'm a mom. So I wanted to know, how do you find the balance with doing wills and estates and like your private life? Do you find you have a good work-life balance, or do you find you struggle at times?
I love that question. And, you know, what I can say is that everything really hits you all at once. If your life is crazy, it's just going to get a bit crazier. And to touch upon that with Siobhan, I do have a newborn. She was born on July 24th. So my hours are late nights and very early mornings. It's really, you know, you try to find the time to make time, right? And it's really being disciplined with the amount of time that you have. And what I found that one of the bigger changes that I've found with just having the addition of a newborn is that time is really of the essence, right? And you want to make sure that you're allocating it appropriately, and it's finding the moments where the time when the baby's sleeping, such as now where she's well fed, that you can jump on these calls, and then when it's time to go, it's time to go, right? It's just making that the decision where you the way I plan my days, essentially, I start very early, right? When I start early, before everybody wakes up, it just gives me time to process all of what I have to do during the day, right? What the major tasks are, and writing down the list of, what's on my schedule, right? It's being quite selfish with your time, and just trying to control what you can, because there's going to be many times where it's just out of your hands, right? The baby's just crying relentlessly, right? And you just don't know. You go into the 3 stages of feeding them, burping them, changing their diapers, and they're still crying, right? So then it's those unforeseen circumstances where you know that, but you start the day very early, right? You've done what you've already done, where you can leave those hours just strictly for family time, right? And that's something that what I try to do is later on during the day, it's okay, well, this is family time, between the periods of whatever hours, right? I know that I'm going to be interrupted, right? Because it's important, even as a lawyer, it's that you always have to be professional with your time, right? And with the work that you're putting out there, right? Because it's really a higher obligation. It's something that we all choose to undertake, right? And everybody here in this meeting have an understanding that it's almost a bit of a higher calling, right? And we know that, and that's part of the whole mentorship side too of, okay, when you've been through the stages that I've been through, all the stages that everyone has been in here, you're always open to helping, right? You're always open to being just an open door. If everybody reaches out to you, you can provide that information, right? So that's part of the reason why that question is great, because you're going to be reaching out to lawyers such as myself, where maybe you don't know that they just had a newborn, or that they're going to. Stephanie, I also saw that you have a pug. I have a pug as well.
I do.
Yeah.
She's not, sorry, this one keeps falling out. Yeah, she's awesome. How old's your pug?
5 years old.
Mine is going to be 6.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, that was essentially our first child, right? That was much of the groundwork there. And so it's a new addition to the family. So, there's a lot of juggling going on here, right? But it's always about finding the balance. And when you do reach out to individuals such as myself, it's being cognizant that whatever time that they allocate to you, as Siobhan said, even if it's a 10-minute a virtual meeting, you just want to make sure that you're very appreciative of their time, and you are doing the research and you're prepared in advance, right? Because in those 10 minutes, you want to get them at a very high level where they are going to somehow provide you with the information that you need in 10 minutes. And you also want to make an impression in that 10 minutes where I say that, I just had a virtual meeting with Stephanie for 10 minutes. She seemed like a very good person. She's interested in this. Maybe I can help her out and make these connections, right? But so you just want to be very specific, oriented, detail oriented, and because there's as Siobhan can probably attest to it, we do have the connections where there's a lot of connections every day, right, Siobhan? And sometimes filtering through them and going through them is quite a challenge, and it takes time, right? So that's why you, even from GLC, and some of the tips is that you just want to hone your pitch, right? You just want to make sure that you're concise, you're to the point, you know what you want to get, and you know what you want to ask, right? Because while we love to talk, we love to talk about specific points, right? Where we can feel that, okay, this is what we can help you with. This is what you need. Okay, here you go, right?
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are parents, I think you become very cognizant of your time and the value of that time that you have, which I don't have kids, so I'm talking here in hyperbole. and literally from colleagues who have children. I don't even have a dog, okay? I have a house plant and it looks really sad right now. So I'm definitely losing at the parent roles right now. But, you know, for parents in particular, you know, that time is very precious. You know, you want to do well in your career, but you also want to be, you know, a good parent,
Present.
having time with your kids at home. And that's one of the things that, for those of you who are sort of more at the entry level to your careers now, is ask people what that's like.
Yeah.
Ask people when you're talking to them, hey, you know what, I have a kid who's 5, for example. Do you happen to know a lawyer who practices in this area, because I'm really interested in it, who also has a child of a similar age? Because then maybe they can recommend or give you an introduction to somebody who can automatically appreciate some of the situations that you're in. Because you're going to get probably a very different answer as to what a firm is like and what the practice of law is like in that particular field if you're 23 and just starting out in your career and your biggest problem is, you know, keeping your houseplant alive, you know, or myself, 40 and
Nothing wrong with that though, Siobhan. Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, or, you know,
Definitely.
juggling 3 children like Tiago is, right? So, you know, there's a very different criteria of what's important to you at your different stages in your life, and that's going to change the whole way through your career, obviously, because your life is going to change and go through all sorts of different personal challenges at home. But that's a great conversation starter. It's a great way to add new people to your network by talking about things like that. And when you're having those interactions with people and you only have 10 minutes, but you're pitching yourself, Stephanie, you've already stood out to Edward because you have this appreciation of a pug who are basically twins by the sounds of it.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
I love it.
you're in Edward's mind because you're Stephanie with the pug. You
Pug
know,
owners forever.
yeah, exactly.
I
I love
gotta
it.
And it's just a way of you, and so this goes back to your question earlier about how do you differentiate yourself. It's how do you make that connection with somebody on a personal level that makes you stand out from the other 300 people they've spoken to this week. And trust me,
Absolutely.
I do probably close to 100 people a week who are asking me questions. So I've become very ruthless with my time. So I apologize to anybody who reaches out to me and gets a very short answer from me. It's just, you're one of many. And I don't want to be like that, but I'm focusing my time on things with people. But do keep reaching out, because that's how we build our relationship and that's how we connect, and then that's how our relationship develops, and then we can introduce you to other people as we get to know you on that one. But do ask those questions. Ask those questions of law firms. Ask those questions of lawyers about what it is that you're going through, whatever it is that you're going through, and find those people who are going through similar things. So whether it's you're from a particular country, or you have a particular religion, or you have a particular medical condition, for example, ask people, find those connections. You can do it. It's sometimes, you know, it's very personal and you don't necessarily want to talk about it, but find someone who you trust, and maybe they can connect you with somebody who has trusted them, who's going through a similar situation, and dig into those questions. And when you get to the interview stage, for example, like Pearl right now, what are those really key important things for you? What are the really important things for you at this point in your life? And ask questions around that. So, you know, when you get to an interview and you get that, do you have any questions for us? And you sit there and you're like, oh my God, that's your opportunity. That's your opportunity right there to ask those questions, to dig in and find out what the firm's like, because even how they react to that unknown question will give you an insight into what the firm's like. Especially if you're a parent and you're asking about parental leave, if they stumble over how they give an answer, it's probably an indication they've not really thought about parental leave and it's not at the forefront of their mind. But if they come out with a whole parental leave plan, then there's obviously lots of parents in the firm. So you're not going to be the only one. You're not going to be the anomaly. Not that that should stop you applying to a firm if you really like them, but it's just another factor to take into account when you're considering where you want to spend the next part of your career on that one. So hopefully that helps. And now you guys know your parents, so you can all support one another and pug loving.
That's a great point. Absolutely.
And it's similar, I think, across the country. So it doesn't matter where you are. I know Edward and I are sitting here in BC, and Tiago's here in BC with us, and a lot of you are on the opposite side of the country. But it's similar criteria, right? It's similar questions because it's a personal thing for you on that one.
Right.
All right. Any other questions for Edward before we let him go, before the baby starts crying so he can actually eat food with 2 hands? No? All right, great. Well, guys, thank you so much for all of your questions. Edward, thank you so much for giving us your time. We truly appreciate everything you've done for the BC chapter and GLC in general. Edward has now joined our advisory board in BC. So he's going to be here in the background, making sure we stay on track, and we're still giving lots of like useful advice, not like the just useless stuff that's in my head for everybody. But if you guys want to be involved, please do reach out. You know, GLC exists for all of you, but we can't make it happen without your involvement. And we've got lots and lots of new volunteer opportunities. If you are in Ontario, the Ontario chapter has their new small group mentoring program. It's starting next month. If you don't get into this round, don't worry, because there is another round already in planning for January. There are also some other mentoring opportunities coming up in January if you want some more sort of one-on-one, even smaller group sessions than this. So stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to do this right. I'm actually going to do this right. Next week, we are doing question time with ITLs. So we're going to have members of the GLC board from across the country joining us to answer your questions. So come armed with your questions, because we have nothing to talk about if you don't have a question. We will just sit here in silence and look at each other, which is stunning, but not very useful. So bring your questions next week for that. And then on September 24th, now I'm really looking forward to this one, we actually have Tiago. Tiago is going to be talking about qualifying as a lawyer in Canada from a Latin American perspective. So if you are joining us from a Latin American jurisdiction, or you know someone who's coming from a Latin American jurisdiction, that is one you're going to come and join us for. It's going to be kind of like Jawad's, because he did it from the subcontinent. If you missed that, you can catch it on our YouTube channel. It was super, super helpful. I learned lots and lots of things that I would never have considered that would be questions, having come from the UK. So it just never occurred to me. They have different words to mean different things. Who would have known that a legal assistant is such a different position in different countries? So I'm really looking forward to what Tiago has to share with us about some of the differences and some of the similarities coming from there as well. But guys, thank you so much. Good luck to all of you. I know that you're many waiting for exam results. Many of you are trying to book in for your next set of exams. We wish you all of the best. And I also know you're all applying for jobs right now as well. So you guys have got this.
Keep pushing, everybody. And thank you again for joining in here, and best of luck. And, you know, you have GLC backing all of you. So, you know, take what you can and just keep going out there and get your name out there, and good things will happen. Trust me.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.